and welcome to a very, very interesting, important and critical debate in this issue and this episode of Point Counterpoint. We are at the crossroads of history, as it were. On one hand, a major Supreme Court judgment sought to be a judgment which has opened the doors for people to fight back and resist the double tracking project cutting across Karnataka and Goa. But on the other hand, the judgment also leaves a lot of questions in its wake, which all of our stakeholders need to answer. For the benefit of the viewers, I'll just quickly sum up the large contours or the broad contours of the matter at hand. And it is as follows. The people of Goa and the activists, other stakeholders, organizations, they've been fighting vociferously against the absolutely illegal, one would go to the extent of saying amoral manner in which the forests and the wildlife of Goa, cutting especially through the Bhagwan Mahavir Wildlife Sanctuary and Mollem, which is a major lung of Goa, how they've been completely destroyed, and the double tracking, the 29 to 35 kilometers stretch of the railway double track which passes through that. Now permissions for that have been called off and cancelled and revoked by the court. However, there's a slight window of opportunity which has been given to the project proponents, the RVNL, Rail Vikas Nigam Limited, who are doing this on behalf of the Southwestern Railways, to appeal again and see that this permission is restored and gotten back. So obviously one needs to look at this, whether the possibility of this will ever happen or not, and if that happens, how does this project move forward? I will begin by looking at one premise, that when this judgment was given, there was immediate elation and a claim to victory. One is, after a couple of weeks, one needs to step back and really look at whether this was elation or whether there's a cloud of despondency that also needs to be looked at. And most importantly, before I begin my opening remarks and hand it over to the panelists, this conversation is also about the fact that you have very, very important institutions and departments within the government these departments are constituted with the sole objective of protecting our ecology, our ecosystems, our environment and our forests. Have these institutions played the part that they should have, or are they, like what many call the CBI, a caged parrot? We have with me a very distinguished panel. I'll start with my left. He's been somebody who's worked and extensively worked with the Department of Forest. He retired as a deputy conservator. Subhash Hendricks, thank you very much for being with us. And I'm sure he'll tell us a lot about the way his government and the system works. Abhijit Prabhudesai of Goin Kolsonaka needs no introduction, one of the foremost activists that Goa has ever had. And he is here, and of course, to speak on various issues and a gamut of issues. We have a special guest from Bangalore, Shija Chakravarti, advocate, who is consistently litigated and fought into all these issues with regard to double tracking, especially with what's happening in Karnataka. And that's a very important perspective that one will get because one doesn't always get the Karnataka perspective, and that's important. Thank you, Shija, for being with us. And then we have Farai Patel, who's an ecologist with the Amche Mole group, a group which again has been one of the forerunners in the whole fight for ecosystem. And the larger issue of the fact that this whole project is meant to carry tons and tons of coal, millions of tons, 40, 50 million tons of coal chugging across the double-tracked areas of Goa, and what it would ultimately mean. So I think when we discuss this, let us not forget that there is an elephant in the room, and that is coal. Okay, I'll start with Abhijit actually. Abhijit, when this whole when the judgment happened, the Mollem judgment, you were one of the first skeptics who said, "Hey, let's not jump." So just take it from there.
Yes, all of us, I think, are thankful that the wildlife clearances are revoked at the moment, but unfortunately a window has been opened, like you rightly said, for them to reapply and get the permissions again. But our fundamental issues with the Supreme Court judgment lie in what's written in the CEC report. The CEC report has extensively looked into the necessity of the double tracking, and they have concluded after consulting the railways and the NPT, and they've concluded that this is only for coal and that this is not needed at all, because the coal transportation is required to be reduced, and therefore existing line is more than sufficient. That's what they conclude. And also that there are alternate routes from places like Krishnapatnam on the east coast which can do the job. So you see, the CEC is an expert committee. In the law of evidence, the reports of an expert committee are evidence in the court. I would have expected the Supreme Court to take that point that this project is not needed and to ask for the project to be actually scrapped entirely. But there are, even if they were not doing that, there are question marks in terms of their failure to consider the forest clearances which have not been revoked. And also the fact that that the railways are pushing through with the construction in the areas outside the protected areas, which is from Vasco to Mollem, which is going through all our densely populated villages, which should have also been stopped.
Correct.
This being a linear project.
What about the non-forested areas within that national park as well? That also needs to be taken into account, because a lot of trees have been cut there as well.
Absolutely. All the work should have been stopped because a linear project, if it doesn't get permission in one part, all the other monies which are spent are wasted. Public funds are going to be lost because people are obviously going to be against this, and all of this has not been considered by the Supreme Court, which is most unfortunate.
Okay, I'll come back to it. Shija, you had raised a red flag in some discussions, basically along the same points. But why do you feel that it is not just a window of opportunity, but much more, taking into account a similar pattern that you may have noticed in your professional work, in other cases or even in the same case?
So one of the points that Supreme Court has missed is that railway claims that they have land inside the national park, both in Mollem and also Kali Tiger Reserve in Karnataka, 5 meters from the existing site they claim as their own, and they refuse to apply the Forest Conservation Act because they say that the land was owned before the existence of the Forest Conservation Act 1980. So now it is a situation where they have used the local tree acts of Goa and Karnataka and have completely violated the law in Karnataka, because the Karnataka Tree Preservation Act requires any public project which requires more than 50 trees to go through a public consultation process. That provision is not there in the Goa Tree Act. So in Karnataka side, what they have done is they have felled the trees. People did not know about it. It was not on the public domain. It was suddenly put up in the public domain after I had filed the PIL in the High Court, in the Karnataka High Court. Similarly, in Goa, what they had done is there is a provision where government projects can be exempted from any of the provisions that apply to the any of the provisions of Tree Preservation Act. So they use the lacunas of the law. This specific issue has not been dealt by Supreme Court. Now the loggerhead of legal issue will happen. The reason being in Karnataka, along with the wildlife clearance now, which is quashed by the Supreme Court, my client has also challenged the tree felling permissions that were given inside the national park. So then there is a huge loggerhead as to, will the challenge still exist? Will the court adjudicate on that? And more so because after a little bit of activism, pressure and all, the tree felling permissions were given a status quo by the same tree officer, saying that let's wait till CEC's report is considered by the Supreme Court. And RVNL has in fact challenged that status quo order as well. So there is an uncertainty to the fate of such litigation. So in a way, how I see it is that, yes, we have won. Yes, the wildlife clearances have been quashed for now, but they will come back. And they will come back in a way when people have already forgotten about the issue. Because there is a right example, which is the Hubli-Ankola railway line. The same thing had happened.
Right.
In 2013, the CEC had submitted a report before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court did not adjudicate on it. Supreme Court sent the whole matter back to NGT. In 2016, NGT disposed of the petition by saying let them apply for the clearances afresh.
Okay.
And those clearances were applied. In 2020, in a completely illegal manner, the State Wildlife Board gave a go-ahead. And then the rest is history. The project was stopped for 1.5 years. There was a good judge who got elevated to the Supreme Court. And now everything else, whatever hindrance is there to the project, has been cleared. So, again, coming back to the judgment, the problematic part about the judgment is that it has not gone into the procedural improprieties that has happened. I will come to it. There are lots of procedural improprieties. Without addressing it, again sending it back and giving the liberty to apply afresh, what new are we expecting? And we also have to keep this in mind that the Wildlife Protection Act is being diluted. There is an amendment bill, as we speak, it's been contemplated by the Parliamentary Standing Committee, under which there is going to be a standing committee of the state board itself. And the performance of the standing committee of the national board is glorious. That's the whole problem. That's the thing that we have challenged. Now there is a standing committee of the state board. So what kind of permission and what kind of checks and balances are we talking about? So the present wildlife clearance which got quashed from the Goa side was doing the rounds from 2016. Today in 2022 it got quashed. It at least took 4 years for it to reach to a position where it was challenged. It's my personal opinion, if the Wildlife Protection Act 2021 comes into the picture, it will take a year or two.
Okay, I'll just come back to you on this. Farai, I'll come to you just after this. Let me go to Subhash here. Mr. Hendricks, the thing is, taking a few points from what both Abhijit and Shija said, the general refrain seems to be that the Forest Department or the Wildlife Board, in this case, the State Wildlife Board, instead of being a protector and a fierce protector, has become an enabler of projects that could be detrimental and harmful to the overall conservation ecosystem. Now the issue is that, is this something that you've noticed in your later years of service, or was it always there and not felt?
Yes, it was always there. But I'll tell you one thing, is the department tops don't have a say to say yes or no, to say no. Somehow it is whatever the government wants, it is yes. Now, the project should have been evaluated whether it is beneficial for whom.
Right, absolutely. That's another
yes,
major
version of that,
area of discussion that we'll have. For whom, yes.
And the laws, whether can be set up free for this project.
Tell me, the thing is, again, you may not have been directly, obviously, involved with the State Wildlife Board as far as this particular project is concerned. But the thing here is, it almost seems as if, most of these wildlife boards are ultimately governed and headed by politicians rather than by professionals. Okay. Now the thing is, even during your time, do you concur with the fact that before projects get ultimately passed, you have the political dispensation which ultimately takes a call, and the bureaucrats and the professionals who are there need to essentially use their pens and the minds to see that it fits the pattern that they have set.
They want.
So can you just elaborate a little bit on this?
No, what you said is absolutely correct. Is a project like this should have been first given to the department whether this should it go through or not.
Right.
And the department should have evaluated whether it will benefit the Goa or not, and not just simply whatever they say agree.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Farai, to bring you into this conversation. So your group and your organization has been, of course, fighting for long. It's been on the ground along with other organizations. Now, when a judgment like this comes, okay, and obviously on the face of it, a lot has been achieved, and it's happened mainly in an area where we all are involved in. What does it take for you to keep this whole thing alive? Because you're in a situation where an apparent victory has happened. Okay, at the same time, it seems to be a cushioned blow which nobody seems to be understanding. How do you take a movement forward when a situation like this is happening? Because it's a very, very pick-point situation where you seem to have a victory and yet not.
Yeah.
And then what do you agitate against at this point of time when an apparent solution has happened, albeit a temporary one?
So I just want to say one thing, which I think many people have not read the judgment. The Supreme Court specifically states in a paragraph in the judgment that the CEC received thousands of submissions,
Right.
of signatures
Right.
from teachers, from lawyers, from activists, from ecologists. So the pressure that everyday goans put on this case is enormous. And the result is certainly not maybe everything that we could have hoped for, which is the project to be cancelled in its entirety. But the Supreme Court has put up many hoops for the RVNL to jump through, which includes doing a cumulative impact assessment, getting clearance from the NTCA,
Correct.
which has already said that the project should be a no-go.
Right.
So there are multiple barriers that the RVNL will have to go through if they want to reapply.
Right.
And we also know, we of course understand that, in terms of the Hubli-Ankola line also, that these things come back after a few years silently. So we're really hoping to put pressure onto the state board to pass a resolution against the railway line, because that will be a very powerful way of stopping it in its tracks.
Okay. Shri, I'll just read out one paragraph from the judgment and you may have a thing or two to say on this. It says the landscape in which the railway line is proposed to pass is an important tiger corridor connecting the three states of Goa, Karnataka and Maharashtra. The report prepared by the NTCA regarding the viability of such a railway line is only for the Karnataka part of the project. No such report has been prepared for the Goa part. The Standing Committee of the NBWL ought to have sought for a report from the NTCA on the Goa part of the project before granting approval for the doubling of the railway line. And it goes on, but I'll stop there. Your quick response to this, and I'll tell Abhijit also.
So, the Goa segment of the project was given clearance first, and then the Karnataka part came. I remember precisely that after all of us started writing, the subcommittee, the Standing Committee of NBWL took a cognizance of the matter, and then they said that with regard to the forest clearances, let's look at it together. Before that was not even a consideration. When it comes to NTCA, they are legally right, because yet Goa is the Mollem National Park or the Wildlife Sanctuary is yet to be declared as a tiger reserve under the Wildlife Protection Act. But it's the same. It's an important corridor and it's the same landscape. It's just a legal connotation to the protection of the part. Now there is something that is very interesting that has happened in NTCA. So the regional office of NTCA, which is in Bangalore, Rajendra Garwad, if I'm not making the mistake of the officer, he made a fantastic report from the Karnataka side. And in the recommendation itself, just what Farai had said, what Supreme Court has upheld, cumulative impact assessment was something that they wanted to be done before the project is considered. Another thing was cost-benefit analysis of the railway line vis-a-vis the four-laning of the national highway.
Right.
So this report was sent from the regional office of Bangalore NTCA to the head office. But when the head office NTCA is giving in a nutshell to the Standing Committee, they did not furnish the whole report of NTCA. So Standing Committee of National Board had never seen those two recommendations. The only recommendation which was easy, which was the last recommendation, that maybe we can employ an institute like Wildlife Institute of India and get some mitigation measure studies done. That was the only thing that was said.
But the
to
cumulative impact assessment was not mentioned.
Nothing.
Okay.
The Standing Committee took a decision even for the Karnataka side without looking at the NTCA report. And I can vouch for it, even the Karnataka Forest Department and the Wildlife Department did not have the whole NTCA report. I have seen the files myself. So why is this mischief? Like when there is a full report done by the closest field officer, when it reaches Delhi, why are you not sending it in entirety?
Right. We can revisit this. Abhijit, of course, you will obviously know about this as well. Peculiarly, the thing is, are they taking recourse to this technicality of the wildlife reserve not being notified, because of which the NTCA recommendations or the NTCA involvement is not happening?
See, the problem is more fundamental. You need to step a little at the back, and like Subhash rightly said, the situation is quite scary at the moment in terms of the fact that officers are not allowed to apply their mind.
Right.
Today we are in a situation where authorities are instructed what should be their conclusions and are then asked to prepare a report to suit that, which is what has happened here. If you see in this case, every correspondence from the railways to the forest department or wildlife officers is always saying that this project is being monitored by the Prime Minister's office.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
Right.
this is the kind of a situation. And in Goa, our forest department officers have made it basically a blanket kind of a clearance by saying recommended in public interest. Just 4 words in their clearances. So you can see that there is absolutely no application of mind. There is absolutely no implementation of the law. There is only following orders that this project is needed. And that's why we need to actually step even further back and see what is this project all about. And CEC has actually exposed it, that this project is only for private interest, for private profit. So in that sense, the entire thing is a hoax. All of these clearances are without any basis, are without any study.
Can you elaborate on this private interest for private profit? One would, at least viewers would like to know.
In fact, I would go a
Why
step
do you say
further.
that?
More than private interest, I would say that this project is against the interests of the nation also. And you need to step even further back and look at what is this all about. This project is about port connectivity. The double tracking is, if you see the Sagarmala report,
Yes.
based on which this is being pushed, this is to allow MPT to handle much more coal, like you said earlier, 40-50 million tons of coal.
Right.
Okay, so now what is MPT all about? If you see, MPT was MPT as well as the railway line which connects it to hinterland of India was constructed by the British in 1880s. And if you see the history of MPT, its main purpose seems to have been to take out the resources of India and take them to the Western world and bring back the finished industrial products at that time in the British era and flood the Indian market and destroy India's economy. That's what MPT has done in the past.
Right.
And today it is not doing anything different. What is the purpose of this double tracking? Is to bring in coal from other countries, burn it in India, dig all our iron ore resources out, build, make steel and send it to the Western world. So nothing has changed. I believe that the struggle against these 3 projects is a struggle in our national interests. And who are the guys who are doing this? These are 3 or 4 private corporations, Adani, Vedanta, Jindal, who are interested in these steel plants. And there's absolutely no public interest at all behind this.
Before we take a break, I'll get back to Mr. Hendricks. So Hendricks, a larger, if we just move away from the current focus topic and look at the larger view of the entire protection of ecology and environment that Goa seems to be grappling with, and one is not looking only at mega projects. If you see every village, you're fighting illegal hill cutting. You are fighting tree felling, which is happening rampantly. If you look at what's happening on the Mopa Link Road, I think it's one of the most saddest and heartbreaking stories where acres and acres of cashew plantation have been completely destroyed, which has led to the loss of livelihoods and living completely. I know people who've pulled their children out of schools because they were actually, their source of earning was cashew plantations. So a lot of these things that happen, decisions that are taken apparently under the name and seal of forest department permissions, ultimately lead to a lot of not just heartbreak but destructions of lives and livelihood in a lot of people. So I see this as not just an ecology story but a very sad human interest story as well. Tell us, as an insider, how does it feel?
You have put it beautifully, and the reality goes back to what we have always been telling, that the bureaucracy in the department has got no say. Whatever the government wants, This is what.
But this also includes forest officers who decide to get into this service with a lot of zeal. There are, there are forest officers at the state level, central level. They took it as their mission. They gave an exam, they passed it, they got into it because they wanted to serve. Obviously, there are. I mean, sad to say, there may be corrupt doctors, there may be corrupt media people, there may be corrupt engineers, there may be corrupt politicians. Every area there's a bit of corruption. But the issue is that in matters like this, if it's so overwhelming, then where do we have a chance? And my point is, can't the system, or at least people in the system, fight back?
See, now regarding this issue, there's been so much of halla gulla going on against the double tracking in these villages of Kansaulim and all that.
Correct. The Murmuga coastal belt. Yes.
Now what is happening? Where is their voice?
Right.
The government says they won the election because people are not against this project. Not against.
Right. Okay, we'll take a very short break. We'll come back in about 2 to 3 minutes. There's a lot more to discuss. Also, specifically, let's discuss a little bit about what the CC recommendations were. I think people need to know that as well. And those recommendations were, I think, far beyond just the scrapping of the wildlife license. We'll come back for more. Thank you for being with us. Welcome back to part 2 of this riveting discussion, which hopefully will lead to some kind of a way forward and strengthen the whole narrative that the judgment, the recent Supreme Court judgment on the double tracking is not conclusive, and there are a lot more grey areas and very deep discussions that need to be had before we can finally conclude that we are on safe territory. I'll cut straight to the chase and speak about the very important CEC report which led to the judgment, and the CEC report which was much more broad-based. It did not only list ecological reasons for the double tracking not to happen, but they laid down a lot of economic reasons which we will get into. But before we do that, let us look into the crux of the whole situation. The whole double tracking universe exists because of the need for the MPT to ensure that more and more coal is brought into India, and larger capacities of coal is transported from Goa to steel plants in Karnataka. And the impediment here happens to be the great forested area in the Mollem belt, because that is where the bottleneck is. And if you have a limit of only 15 rakes passing a day through that, then obviously that amount of coal will not suffice the business, the so-called business needs of the project proponents. And that is where the crux lies. There are alternate routes for sure, and alternate routes have been mentioned not only by the CEC but by the Supreme Court as well. And if those alternate routes are taken, then this whole business of double tracking goes away in a jiffy, because the need for that will not arise. But obviously it will cost the project proponents much more to follow that route. But to save those costs, look at the price that Goa is paying, both in terms of hard currency, but mainly in terms of the loss of livelihoods, loss of ecology, heritage, and an absolute destruction of Goa, as it were. I'll get to one important paragraph of the Supreme Court judgment where the court specifically speaks about an alternate port and why it is important to do that. And that is significant, and I think that hasn't really been highlighted enough. Now, I'll just read this. Okay. It very specifically states, and this is the quote: "We are in agreement with the CEC that the requirement of coal can be met by utilizing the Krishnapatnam port, which is a viable alternative for the transportation of coal. The said suggestion would also prevent the degradation of the Western Ghats." By this, it is implicit that the court feels that the Western Ghats is really getting degraded. "Even according to RVNL, traffic on the Konkan railway line is frequently dislocated due to landslides, breaches, especially during the rainy season." So there are two things, both Abhijit and Fry, I'll come to you first, is that there is an acceptance by the court that this coal should be brought in from an alternate port. Point number one. Point number two, it also says that the degradation of the Western Ghats is going to be saved. That itself I think is an extremely critical line, where the court says that this current project itself is leading to the degradation of Western Ghats. So whether you have the State Wildlife Board's permission and the NBW's permission or not is irrelevant in the light of this particular statement.
Absolutely. I mean, based on what the CEC has stated in its report and the Supreme Court orders,
yes,
it would have been logical for the state and central government to drop the project right away.
Right.
I mean, that is basic logic. When your expert is telling you that this project is not required, you are supposed to say that, okay, I'm going to drop it. But on the contrary, you can see that the work on the ground is being expedited, accelerated across the non-forested areas. And you can see that the government, the state government of Goa has met and has actually taken a decision that the project will be continued irrespective of the Supreme Court orders. So we can see here...
Let's speak a little bit about this port issue. When there is an alternate port, why are they not doing it? Let's
absolutely. So this is a fundamental issue. The ports on the east coast of India have got substantial spare capacity.
Right.
And this coal requirement of Karnataka, Bellary Hospet region can easily be satisfied from the ports on the east coast. There is absolutely,
especially when the coal is coming from the east.
Is also coming from the east.
Yes.
And the terrain is not so ecologically sensitive. It's flat land and it's not going to be expensive to build that railway track. The only reason, and if you see the Sagarmala report, you will understand why this is being done. The Sagarmala report in fact recommends that coal eventually be extracted in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, etc., taken to the ports on the east coast and brought by sea around India and brought to Mormugao and to Goa and taken to Karnataka. Not just 40-50 million tons from MPT, but another 80 to 90 million tons from all our rivers and khazans. So this is what is being recommended in the Sagarmala policy, which is completely contrary to all the other policies, like the Prime Minister's promises to the entire world that we're going to reduce coal by 40%. I mean, you're just throwing that out of the window. Similarly, if you see reports done by the Planning Commission, they are saying that MPT should stop handling coal and move to green cargo.
That's right, correct.
Yeah, so these policies are being thrown out, and the Sagarmala project seems to be running the show now.
Mr. Hendricks, a quick word from you on the whole issue of alternate ports and why this has not been done.
See, now I would say, first of all, Goa is a very small, beautiful place. Why spoil the place with this coal which we don't require? We as ourselves hardly use any coal. You must be aware. And when there is an alternative in Karnataka or in the east coast, why use Goa for that?
No, that is being used because it's much more cheaper and economical. That is the only reason.
But you want to finish up with this small...
Because as he said, this whole issue of this private profit coming in, the point is the state is paying for the profit of private corporates.
If I may add, it's in the Sagarmala report, and we have placed it before the government that all of this is being done only for a few rupees extra profit in terms of transportation, because Goa is a bit closer to the destinations than the east coast. Just for a few rupees more of profit, they are willing to destroy the Western Ghats, destroy the all the populated areas of Goa. So that's what is driving this, a little bit more of profit.
Farai, let's open up this a little broader. If you can just take us through the critical aspects of the CEC recommendations and what the court seems to have accepted or not, but by and large on what the CEC recommendations were. And where do you think that those recommendations, some of those key recommendations have either been bypassed or put on the back burner?
So, as Abhijit was saying, the CEC was pretty expansive when it came to do its fact-finding mission, and it didn't just deal with the ecological aspects of the Western Ghats, the biodiversity, but also did a pretty detailed analysis about the number of trains, the amount of coal, where are the empty rakes, and they did a bit of an economic analysis, and in fact, RVNL,
Right.
which filed a response to the CEC in the Supreme Court, was pretty annoyed by this.
Right.
And they said, the CEC has no jurisdiction over any of this. Why are they saying all of this? But the report itself is very, very powerful, and it should put the nail in the coffin.
Right.
And since the Supreme Court judgment has not put the nail in the coffin, I think it is a really good resource for future litigation, particularly for the cases that should happen outside the protected area, because the line, like the railway line, is completely economically unviable, which is what the CEC concluded. And I also just want to say that, what Abhijit was saying about Modi's promises, it's really important to even think about why are we importing this much coal, right? This is like we are living in a time of real climate, almost catastrophe. And coal, even if you just look at the market of coal, many coal-fired plants are not even economically viable in themselves, but we are still choosing through huge government subsidies to import coal, to burn coal for electricity, when renewable energy is a much more viable option. So we really should be questioning the government as to why are they still buying coal? Why are we still going down this route of extractive fossil fuel based economies?
Right. Shija, coming to an interesting point that we were discussing, it's all about this whole Karnataka versus Goa. How much money is being spent for the Karnataka part, and how much money is being spent for the Goa part? While this starts from Karnataka, the entire action seems to be in Goa. Can you just take us a little bit onto where the resources are actually coming from and what kind of funding is happening for this project, either private or otherwise?
So, the Karnataka stretch from Hospet to Castle Rock, the non-forest part, has been sponsored by the Asian Development Bank, 245 kilometers.
They are funding the RVNL?
Yes, yes. And the remaining 100 kilometer, of which 30 kilometers is the protected areas. From there, it's the funding of the Government of India, borne by the government of Goa as well. So the last stop from where the forest starts,
Right.
the Karnataka stretch, is where ADB is funding it. Now, what ADB essentially does is they have their own internal environmental audits.
Right.
So, some organizations from Karnataka had brought it to their notice that in spite of having so many internal checks and errors in your own funding requirements, how come you have missed the point that what you are sponsoring is going to eventually lead to a destruction of the 8th hottest hotspot of the world, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Right.
So, ADB had not got back to the organization with much responses. They have just said that it is nothing that we can work on. We are very concerned about the development of the country. Now, this development of the country debate is absolutely bogus, because ADB, being a forefront banking organization, should know that the word development doesn't exist. There is only one word which we can see over and over in all the international treaties on climate change, is the word sustainable development. And the courts have also started using it. For the good or bad, it's a debate on its own. Now, going back to what Abhijit said, that why not use the Krishnapatnam port and why MPT? So, the whole justification from the project starts from the Sagarmala project, Sagarmala report. Now, Sagarmala report has been prepared by a consultant called McKinsey. Their only interest is profit and profit alone. McKinsey has so much of spine to write in the report that this railway line needs to be done ASAP. And if required, state governments have to be pressurized. That's there. Now, when
It is there in the McKinsey report.
In the Sagarmala
In the
report
Sagarmala
prepared by
report, sorry.
McKinsey.
Yeah, okay.
So, when this was brought before the court in the Bangalore High Court, RVNL was very unhappy about it. They first raised allegation against
RVNL, for the benefit of our viewers, is Rail Vikas Nigam Limited, which is carrying out the project for Southwestern
Project
Railways.
Implementing
Yes,
Agency.
yes.
So RVNL was very annoyed with this averment in the petition. They raised certain arguments of vested interest and all against the petitioner, who happens to be the ex-forest secretary, the environment secretary of the state of Karnataka,
Right.
and he is an 80-year-old man.
Right.
Apart from that, again going back, that why is it so lucrative to take the project through forest? So it's a very technical point, but it comes down that any project through a protected area just requires 5 signatures. That is all that is required. So the DCF signs, the conservator signs, the PCCF signs, and then the state board and the national board. That is all that is required. And all in the name of national development and on lease. You're not buying the land. The legal status of that forest never changes.
Right.
On paper, it is still a forest. It's
Right.
still a national park.
Right.
But it's so easy to acquire that land. However, if you have to make a third line through the Krishnapatnam port to give in to the quantity or the needs of Hospet, Bellary industrial area, you have to go through agricultural land. You have to go through revenue land. And the land acquisition price goes up immensely higher. So vis-a-vis the 5 signatures and the less distance, 345 kilometers, it's I think 450
And compensation amounts will be far less.
Exactly. So it's lot more cheaper to take projects through forest because it's just not the railway doubling. If we step back a little bit, we will see a trend from 2014 onwards that it's only 3% of our total land area is protected area, right? Or
Right.
the whole geographical area.
Right.
But there is a great push in every scape to open all our protected areas. Be it for the railway, be it for the highway, be it for transmission line, and everything is national interest.
Right.
Now, the most important national interest today is to conserve our water resources,
Correct.
which is the Western Ghats, to conserve our forest.
Right.
So the debate only is wrong. It's some advertising and some greenwashing terms that they talk about, but actually it's bogus. As I said, it takes 5 signatures to take land like that. Where is the checks and balances? See, you can see the amount of resistance that's there in the South Goa part,
Right.
right, of the
Right.
land acquisition.
Right.
And if not for Amche Mollem, if not for Abhijit, if not for people like Goa Foundation, there was no resistance actually. 5 signatures and that was it.
Right. Mr. Hendricks, this whole issue of 5 signatures which he's talking about pertains to forests. Can you just elaborate a little bit on this? I mean, you must be knowing this.
Yeah, I agree. With her, what she says is absolute. Those are the only signatures you require. Nothing else.
No, but before giving these signatures, is there any internal assessment, internal review, internal survey when land is being kind of surrendered in this kind of a manner in forested areas?
It is done.
Right.
But ultimately, the decision is, as it was already mentioned,
Right.
comes from the top. And the 5 sign.
Can you tell us, interestingly, without necessarily naming the project if you don't want to, can you give us specific examples of things like this happening during your tenure in Goa? You may or may not share the actual project, but it'll be great if you do. But even otherwise, if you can just tell us.
I personally was not involved in this.
Right. But you know that this happens.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Moving to the next part of this whole discussion, let's go back again to the crux of this whole Mollem judgment and the CC report and what happened earlier, because the story begins on, I think, December 2nd, 2019, when the State Wildlife Board actually met to accord the first level wildlife permission for this particular double tracking to cut through those crucial 29 kilometers of forested land. Both, of course, Abhijit and Shija, and perhaps you two, you may not have had a ringside view, but you have pretty deep information of what really happened during those times. We just, this is basically to share with our viewers as to how our forests were basically signed off by the State Wildlife Board, whose mandate is actually to protect it. And I think we are sitting here today discussing the entire assault that has happened on the Mollem forest, primarily because of decisions that those wise men took on the 2nd of December 2019. So it's very important to share with everybody as to what happened on the 2nd of December 2019. Both Abhijit and Shija and others can chip in any time, but would like request both of you to dwell on
Can
this.
I quickly start on
Yes,
this?
yes.
Actually, the first meeting, this was the double tracking was taken up by the State Board of Wildlife
Right.
in 3 meetings. The first one was in October 2016.
Right.
And one of the members gave us a tip that this is what's happening. And from Rainbow Warriors, we sent out a letter to the government in 2017 in the month of May, telling them that these projects, all the 3 linear projects, are purely for private interest. They have got no public interest, and we stated all the environmental, ecological, and other reasons why these projects should not be taken up.
Right, right.
The same issue was then taken up in December, around November or December of 2017. And then eventually, like you rightly said, in December 2019, it was passed. But our objections have not been taken up at all. In fact, as we understand from members of the board, not a single document was placed before them. No impact assessment studies, nothing to decide upon. So the board is now chaired by the Chief Minister. The Chief Minister sits there and gives the agenda, says, okay, there's a double tracking project, and he says this has got to be passed.
Was it a virtual meeting?
In 2019, no,
No, it
these are
wasn't.
all meetings which all of them were held. They were
Right.
all pre-COVID.
Yeah, they were pre-COVID, yes, yes.
So what happens here is you've got this board sitting there, and they are told there's a double tracking project through the Mahavir Wildlife Sanctuary, and that we are going to go ahead with it. They don't have a single document with them to decide upon, and it's unfortunate that no flags were raised by any of the members, which is something that
No, but I
should
think
not happen.
two members raised objections later, wrote letters.
That was post
Yes.
permission.
Yes.
But in the very first instance, when you are sitting in the board, you're required to say that I need to see the documents before this is passed. But,
Right,
but
right.
the unfortunate situation is that the board is chaired by the Chief Minister, and most of the members of the board are other MLAs and politicians and bureaucrats from various departments who have no interest in environment.
Right.
And therefore the few voices probably would have anyway been silenced, but I would have loved to see more objections in the minutes of the meeting.
Yeah, Shrija?
See, the fundamental problem with the state board is that Section 6 of the Wildlife Protection Act very specific has 2 provisions, subsection E and F. As per subsection E, there needs to be 10 people who are eminent conservationist, ecologist and environmentalist. Now, eminent conservationist, ecologist and environmentalist is not defined. So what we see is most of the time some pseudo people come into the board under those categories.
Right.
There is also a provision where 3 non-governmental NGOs are also required there.
Right.
So now the quality of those 13 member or those 13 seats are very questionable. Because in Karnataka we have seen what has happened, and that whole constitution is under challenge.
Right.
And few people, after being named and shamed by the court itself, have resigned and gone.
Right.
Because again, I think they felt that they do not qualify as eminent.
But all wildlife boards need to have 13 people.
Yes, 13 independent voices
Right.
apart from the official
Right,
members.
right.
Now that is
Did that
one.
happen in Goa, Abhijit? Are you all aware whether that was the case in Goa? Were there 13 people?
If you see the
See the
minutes,
membership.
there are about 31 members of the
31
board,
Okay.
which include, like she said, about 13 members who are non-government. So yeah, we had actually quite a few.
On
of our
paper they were?
activists. On paper, no, they were present and they've signed the minutes also.
right.
Some were absent, right?
Yeah, a few were absent,
Few were absent.
but many were present.
So
Right.
those 13 member participation is very important to see what's the quality.
Right.
And that is exactly what the Wildlife Protection Amendment Bill 2021 wants to bring in. That there will be a shorter committee, a stand-in committee to represent the state board.
Right.
So that's something that's very worrisome with the new bill.
Why do you call it worrisome?
Because we can see how the standing committee of the national board is functioning.
Okay.
Like most of the members are not even eligible to be there.
Right.
So
right.
every 3 years, their membership expires.
Right.
Like if the board was constituted in 2019, then it will expire in 3 years, and
Right.
all those independent experts have to be reappointed, or new people have to come on the board.
Right. Right.
So now if you fill those posts up with political appointees per se, I'm not saying it is the way
Right.
how it is, then it's so easier. If you can have yes man sitting there in the garb of environmentalist and ecologist, so there is no independence of voice over there. And you have to understand that when another legal loophole into the whole state board not giving the agenda, not sharing the documents is the reason that as per the Wildlife Protection Act, the state government also has a responsibility of framing rules as to how the procedure and functioning of the state board would be.
Right.
Karnataka does have a rule.
Right.
As per that rule, the chief minister has a power to invite 3 people in such meetings.
Right.
And those people cannot be anybody but somebody involved with wildlife conservation.
Right.
In absence of such a rule, the chief minister is free to invite anybody. And Goa does not have that rule.
Okay.
The rule in Karnataka says that if there is a meeting, 15 days prior you have to share the agenda and all the information. Nothing of that sort exists in Goa. So we should start asking this question that why such rules are not framed.
Which is the reason when people went for this crucial December 2nd
Yes.
meeting, they had no agenda at all
Exactly.
in front of them.
And nothing binds them because
Right.
there is no rule.
Right. Right.
It's been 1972 till 2022. The state has not framed the rules of how a state board
So
should
what you are
function.
saying in Karnataka, out of the 13 people, the chief minister can call 3 out of those 13 who need to be wildlife
No,
experts.
no. Exterior.
Exterior, right.
Additional 3 people.
Okay. Mr. Hendricks, are you aware of this, and do you feel that these, obviously we are in agreement that these questions need to be raised, but has it ever come into the whole discourse of the forest department that a lot of these boards or these external members who are invited need to be people who are absolute experts and leave the decision to the forest department to actually pick these experts and talk? In your long career in the forest department, have you even come across any discussion on this at all?
No, not at all. I have not come across any discussion. But I know that the environment, whoever been appointed is by the department.
No, department
They
on
need
paper will find as it
Need
is.
not be experts.
Right. No, it just shows, see, what is happening is his response also really actually confirms that there doesn't seem to be any worry on this point, and there is no thought, there is no
Boards are not taken seriously.
there is no agenda, the boards are not taken seriously, and what is most important is that there is no narrative or a discourse within the department itself to strengthen its own self, and that again is the issue. Okay, we are really running out of time. But quick, we need to unpack 2 more quick issues. I will not delve too much into a couple of other issues I was planning to, mainly with regard to what next legally, but we all know that there is a challenge and we've addressed this. But I think we shouldn't end this debate without 2 aspects. One is the manner in which people opposing the project, especially NGOs and groups and others, are taken as the other. There is a state which wants development, and there is the other which does not want development, and the manifestation of that was very evident in the fallout of the very large spontaneous public agitation that took place in December 2020, on the night of December 1st, 2020, if I'm not mistaken. 1st, 2nd. Or there was November 1st or December 1st?
November 1st.
November 1st, 2nd. On the intervening night of November 1st and 2nd. Yes, correct. So the thing is, when that happened, of course, we all know what happened. There was an absolute outpouring of public support, cutting across, of course, different social lines and cutting across different political lines as well. Post which, almost as an afterthought, there was a few activists who were picked up, and 4 of them faced cases against them, which are still apparently going on. One of them is sitting in this in our studios, Abhijit. But let the law always take its course, as we always say for everything, but not getting into the merits or demerits of the investigations and what is happening. But it seems a little odd as to why this kind of a targeting would happen, especially with 4 people when there were almost 5,000 people there, if not more.
Yeah, there are 2 aspects of it. The first one is the targeting of a few of us, but I think the forefathers of this nation would be proud of us. So that's good enough for me, and we love these cases. We don't have any problems with them. But what concerns me, what worries me, is that when 10,000 people come out and peacefully protest in such a beautiful manner, I think any government would have bowed down to the public voice.
Right.
This is a democracy where the people should rule.
Right.
We have more than 100 out of our 189 panchayats, irrespective of their political linkages, taking resolutions, Gram Sabhas and panchayats resolving we don't want coal in Goa.
Right.
We wrote a letter to the Chief Minister. We've written so many letters to everybody. We wrote a letter where more than 130 organizations across Goa have supported us in demanding that this project double tracking should be stopped. All of this doesn't seem to make any difference to the government, which means that the government does not believe in democracy, does not believe in its own people, and is working against public interest.
There's one caveat before I go to you in what Abhijit is saying, and I agree completely with him. The caveat here is that, for this debate, and we'll go a little behind the scenes, we struggle to get people in the forest department, people who are on the on the side that can really make a difference if they want to, including forest officers, the PCCFs, people in the Director of Environment, anybody who could comment and discuss and throw light on what the government intends to do to come for this debate. And the rate and the speed at which the buck was passed was could have done any Olympic champion proud. Nobody wanted to come. Number two, excuses popped up left, right, and center. Meetings and weddings happened. And of course, one doesn't grudge any of these social commitments anybody has, but the point here is the refrain that we got was that I'm not authorized to speak. Now, if everybody, and we went up and down that whole chain of command, and if nobody is authorized to speak, then who's authorized to speak for the government? Will the government only meet opposition for the sake of Goa only in courts, or will they only meet them in police stations, or will they only meet them on railway tracks? My issue is that when there is a scope for a healthy discourse and a debate, why wouldn't the government meet people halfway and at least have a discussion on this? You can agree to disagree. You can have very strong points and opinions. But what happens is that though this discussion has been completely riveting, I must admit that we are a constituency of the convinced. But the point here is the other constituency, and unfortunately we are calling them the other, also needs to be here to tell us why we are wrong, to tell us if we are wrong or why we are wrong. And that is not coming out. So the issue is, if this sounds one-sided on one way of looking at it, is yes, there is only one side to it. When you protect Goa, when you look at ecology, and when you want to preserve every piece of greenery and ecology which is available to you for the sake of your future generation, there is only one side. But it is important to know why this side becomes one side and not just one side which is the other, rather than this being the main side and the only side. So anyway, these are larger thoughts that you can pack and take home. But I think it was important to mention this as to why the government, or at least representatives of departments and wildlife, are not here. Of course, Mr. Hendricks is here, but he's no longer in service. I do not know whether we would have had the honor of having him here if he was in service. But again, just moving on. Now tell us, looking into the larger issue of what we've been discussing, and Amche Mollem, of course, has been an organization that has really spurred a lot of people who did not get into activism, who did not plan to get into activism, doing things for the state without necessarily giving them any tag. And one saw long marches, rallies, the statewide movement which happened, and also the fact that there are a lot of people from schools and colleges and others who have plunged headlong into this. Tell us a little bit about the great the human force that has fueled this agitation.
Wow. So yeah, it was a very long journey, but I think it really just showed the strength of people coming together from really all walks of life, all professions, students, teachers, giving time that I don't know if before this otherwise they would have given. And I think there is a growing understanding that, you know, the developmental paradigm that we have been told to believe is maybe not good for us, our health, our environment, our happiness. And to start questioning that, you know, these huge infrastructure projects that are coming up, it's not just in Mollem, it's all over Goa, the ports, Mopa, everywhere you look actually there's some huge construction project going on. You know, you can see that it's actually not for the benefit of the people, because the very basic services that we need and we want, whether it's garbage collection or piped water, all these things that actually improve quality of life are completely ignored. And I think the amazing groundswell that we saw came from a lot of this frustration, and it came out in this really beautiful way through art, through music, and also through people taking action, which was really amazing. And I think we also know that it's not over yet. There is still a lot of fighting to be done, and we are hoping to continue raising our voices.
Last quick point, Shija, see, the thing is, we have been obviously talking about that 29-kilometer stretch and the forest stretch, but there is a large part outside it as well, and especially the South Goa stretch from Margaon to Isorsi. I think it's mainly that stretch from Uttorda to Isorsi. I think that's where the heritage houses are going and it's possible. Now the issue is that this whole agitation, while this has become a forest versus so-called development story, but at the same time it is also a heritage story in Goa, in the sense that the tracks are and the people who are getting affected. Yes, coal certainly is an issue, like he also mentioned, but there is a heritage issue also. So there almost seems to be this whole thing which says that, look, outside the forest area it's okay. It is just the forest area which is. But at the end of the day, you know, we are also dealing with humans. We are dealing with wildlife, and we are dealing with humans whose heritage, their homes, their way of life. So do you feel that also needs to be kind of highlighted alongside, so that it doesn't become just a forest versus non-forest debate?
No, it's absolutely required, and it's required under the law.
You're right.
So, Right to Fair Compensation Act has a provision where there is a mandate of preparing a social impact assessment.
Right.
So unless and until the social impact assessment is prepared and discussed with the people, I don't think this sort of comments that people wanted should not be taken any seriously.
Right.
Because first they need to do what is required of them under the law to make such statements. If such statements are being made, I think it's better to be ignored.
Okay. Quick last 1 minute. Each of you will have about 10 seconds. What next? How can both our forest and non-forest areas be protected, and what is in store? Just a quick 10-second off-the-cuff response.
I think we have covered up everything, and what is ultimate is this double tracking and what all this project should be scrapped.
Abhijit, quick.
Very simply put, MPT should move over to a green port, do only maybe some cruise tourism and green cargoes. Coal transportation must be stopped completely. And let us look at fighting for our children's future by fighting this climate crisis, by actually going for, self-reliant local economies, which is what is needed, rather than, serving the private profit of a few corporations.
Great.
I think our Wildlife Protection Act and our environmental laws are pretty strong, and these project proponents are finding ways to dilute it and misuse the law. I think the government should show a stand, not only in the international forum where they talk about climate change commitments and all. There should be some inclination shown to protect these spaces, because these are actually no-go areas, and we are, as Farai rightly said, that we are in a climate catastrophe.
Okay, Farai, last word.
I think we should really see the Supreme Court verdict as a victory, and there's still a lot of fighting still to be done, but we should take that win that we've got and continue looking forward.
Well, that just about sums it up. I'll just end by saying that often we are despondent, despair creeps up, but the problem with despair is that despair is not a luxury that any of us can afford to have, because when you despair, you end up saying that, look, there's nothing that can be done, and let the world go on. Unfortunately, that's a risk we cannot take. because every moment that we spend in being sad and giving up, and when we give up, we take that little inch of Goa away from the future that we have. Why not Goa, the entire country for that matter? And that is what we must understand, that is the reason why people give so much of their time and their energy, their finances to do what they are doing. And that, I think, is the finest spirit of nationalism that anybody can ever talk of. We'll leave you with that thought. I thank all my panelists for spending so much of time and giving their deep insights into all of this. Thank you very much, and we'll be around for much more of this. Thank you.